For 18 years, the rusted iron gates ascent. Jude's home for children were the only borders of my world. I grew up believing I was a ghost in the making, just another ward of the state abandoned by a mother who couldn't be bothered, destined to age out and fade into the background of society. On the morning of my 18th birthday, I packed my entire existence into a single duffel bag. Beatrice Cole, the director of St. Jude's, called me into her office just as I was zipping up my jacket. She was a stern woman with a perpetual frown, but her hands trembled slightly as she pushed a thick, manila envelope across her scuffed wooden desk. "This arrived for you 3 days ago, Clara," Beatrice said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "I was instructed by the sender to hold it until the exact day you turned 18. The return address belonged to a law firm in Asheville, North Carolina, Montgomery & Associates." Inside the envelope was a heavy, watermarked letter from a lawyer named Silas Montgomery. It stated, in cold, clinical legalese, that a man named Eric Harris had recently passed away. According to Silas, Eric was a distant great-uncle on my mother's side. I had never heard the name in my life. The letter concluded with a sentence that made the linoleum floor feel like it was dropping out from beneath my feet. "As the sole surviving heir of the Harris bloodline, you have inherited the entirety of the Harris estate, including the primary residence located at Black Mountain, a house I had spent my entire life sharing a drafty dormitory with 6 other girls, and suddenly I owned a mountain estate." Included in the envelope was a set of heavy brass keys and a cashier's check for $10,000 to cover relocation and immediate living expenses. It felt like a mistake, a cruel joke played on an orphan. But 2 days later, I was behind the wheel of the beat-up second-hand Honda Civic I bought with a fraction of the check, winding my way up the treacherous, fog-chilled roads of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Pinecrest Manor did not look like a gift. It looked like a warning. Nestled at the end of a long, unpaved driveway heavily shaded by ancient, looming pine trees, the house was a massive Victorian-style structure of dark wood and gray stone. The wraparound porch sagged slightly on one end, and ivy crawled up the northern wall like a web trying to pull the house back into the earth. It was breathtaking, yet entirely suffocating. I parked the car, the crunch of the gravel echoing loudly in the absolute silence of the mountain. My hands shook as I fitted the largest brass key into the heavy oak front door. With a groan of rusted hinges, it swung open. The air inside was stale, smelling of lemon polish, old paper, and an undercurrent of something metallic and cold. The foyer was vast, featuring a grand mahogany staircase that swept up to the second floor. Most of the furniture in the sitting rooms was draped in white dust sheets, looking like silent phantoms holding their breath. For the first 2 days, I did little but wander the halls, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of my inheritance. There were oil paintings of landscapes, sprawling rugs, and an extensively stocked library. Yet, something felt deeply wrong. There was a clinical sterility to the house. There were no family photographs, no personal knickknacks, no evidence that a man named Eric Harris had actually lived here, loved here, or had any connection to a family. It was on the 3rd day, during a heavy Appalachian thunderstorm, that I found the anomaly. I had been exploring the east wing on the 2nd floor when I noticed the hallway didn't quite match the exterior architecture. The corridor dead-ended at a blank wall featuring a large, ornate mirror. But based on the windows from the outside, there should have been another 20 feet of house behind it. I approached the mirror. It was heavy, framed in tarnished silver. Running my fingers along the wood paneling beside it, I felt a slight draft. I pressed hard against the molding, and with a sharp click, the mirror swung outward on hidden hinges. Behind it was a narrow, unlit hallway leading to a heavy steel door. It wasn't an antique wooden door like the rest of the house. It was a modern security door, equipped with a heavy deadbolt and a keypad. My heart hammered against my ribs. The brass keys Silas Montgomery had sent me didn't include anything that would fit a modern deadbolt, and I certainly didn't know the code. I spent 3 hours scouring Eric Harris's study downstairs. I rifled through tax documents, bank statements, and old letters. Finally, taped to the bottom of the middle desk drawer, I found a small slip of paper with a 6-digit number, 9914. I ran back upstairs. The keypad beeped in the quiet hallway as I punched in the numbers. 009.1498. The lock disengaged with a heavy thud. I pushed the door open, fumbling for a light switch. When the harsh fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, the breath left my lungs. It wasn't a storage room, it was a bedroom, but it was designed like a gilded cage. There were no windows. The walls were lined with soft, soundproofing foam painted a pale, sickly yellow. A small bed sat in the corner, neatly made. Next to it was an easel with half-finished watercolor paintings, mostly of the mountains outside painted from memory, it seemed, since the artist couldn't see them. But what drew my eye was the walls. Pinned to the soundproofing foam were hundreds of photographs. I walked closer, my legs feeling like lead. The photos were of me. There were pictures of me as a toddler in the orphanage yard. Pictures of me at 10, playing kickball. Pictures of me at 15, walking home from the local high school. They were taken from a distance, through chain-link fences or from parked cars. On a small writing desk in the corner sat a stack of leather-bound journals. I sat in the chair, my hands trembling violently as I opened the first one. The handwriting was frantic, elegant, but deeply erratic. October 14th, 1998. Eric told me today that if I try to leave again, he will stop the anonymous donations to St. Leah. Jude's. He said he will make sure Clara is put into the foster system, separated from the only home she knows. I have to stay. As long as I stay in this room, he promises she will be safe. I watched her today through the new photos Silas brought. She has my eyes. A sob tore from my throat. Eric Harris was not my great uncle. And my mother had never abandoned me. I spent the next 12 hours locked in that room, reading every single journal. The story they told was a nightmare. Evelyn Hayes, my mother, was a young, struggling artist when she met Eric. He was vastly wealthy, older, and deeply controlling. When she got pregnant with me, his possessiveness turned violent. Recognizing that Eric viewed both of us as property, my mother plotted an escape. When I was 3 months old, she managed to slip away in the middle of the night and left me on the steps of St. Jude's with nothing but a blanket and my name, knowing Eric would never think to look for his heir in a destitute state-run orphanage. She was right about me, but wrong about herself. Eric found her. Instead of killing her, he brought her back to Pinecrest Manor. He built the room. He forced her into an impossible bargain. She would remain his hidden prisoner, and in exchange, he would ensure I grew up safely at the orphanage, untouchable. Silas Montgomery, the lawyer, was the architect of the blackmail. He managed the estate, paid off the right people, and provided my mother with the surveillance photos of my life to keep her compliant. Eric had died a month ago of a sudden stroke. But what happened to my mother? The last journal entry was dated only 3 weeks ago, September 2nd. Eric hasn't come down in 4 days. Silas came today instead. He looked panicked. He told me Eric is dead. He said he's moving me. He's terrified of the liability. I begged him to let me see Clara. He sedated me. I don't know where I'm going. If Clara ever finds this, Clara, my sweet girl, I never left you in my heart. Everything I did to keep you in the light. I closed the journal, tears staining the leather cover. Anger hot, blinding, and absolute replaced the fear in my chest. I didn't call Silas Montgomery. I knew if I tipped my hand, he would make the evidence disappear, and my mother along with it. Instead, I packed the journals, the photographs, and every piece of financial documentation I could find in Eric's study into my duffel bag. As I was heading toward the front door to leave for the police station, headlights swept across the dark windows of the foyer. A black sedan pulled up the gravel driveway. Silas Montgomery stepped out. He was a tall, sharply dressed man in his 50s, carrying a leather briefcase. He used his own key to open the front door. He froze when he saw me standing in the foyer, my heavy duffel bag slung over my shoulder. "Clara," he said, recovering quickly, pasting on a smooth, patronizing smile. "I didn't expect you to arrive so soon. I thought we were meeting next week to finalize the deed." "Where is she?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. I was shocked by how steady I sounded. Silas' smile faltered slightly. "I'm not sure I follow. Where is who?" "Evelyn Hayes. My mother." I took a step forward. "I found a room, Silas. I found the journals. I know about the 6-digit code. I know what you and Eric did." The lawyer's face hardened. The polite veneer dropped instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. You are an 18-year-old girl with no family, no money of your own, and no standing in this county, he said quietly. Eric left you this house out of a misguided sense of guilt. I suggest you accept the gift, sell the property, and live a very comfortable life. Digging into the past will only result in you losing everything, including your freedom. Is that a threat? It's legal reality. Silas stepped further into the house, blocking the door. Give me the bag, Clara. We are going to sit down, and we are going to draft a non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, I will ensure the transition of Eric's offshore accounts into your name. Millions of dollars. All yours. Just hand over the bag. He lunged for me. I wasn't a delicate heiress. I was a girl raised in the rough-and-tumble halls of an underfunded orphanage. As his hand grasped the strap of my bag, I swung my heavy, brass key-loaded fist directly into his face. The metal crunched against his nose. Silas shouted in pain, stumbling backward and clutching his face as blood poured over his hands. I didn't wait for him to recover. I bolted at the open front door, sprinting through the rain to my Honda. I jammed the keys into the ignition, threw it into reverse, and tore down the gravel driveway, leaving Silas Montgomery bleeding in the doorway of the House of Horrors he helped maintain. I drove straight to the state police barracks in Asheville, bypassing the local authorities entirely. I demanded to speak to a detective. That was how I met Detective Harrison Reed. He looked exhausted, clutching a stale cup of coffee, ready to dismiss me as a runaway or a hysterical teenager. But when I dumped the leather journals, the financial ledgers, and the surveillance photos of myself onto his desk, his posture changed. Within 4 hours, a tactical team raided Pinecrest Manor. Silas Montgomery was apprehended at the local airport trying to board a private charter out of the state. But my only concern was my mother. Working through Silas's financial documents, Detective Reed found a series of recent, massive payments to a private, highly secretive psychiatric care facility 2 hours away, listed under a shell corporation. They were paying for a Jane Doe who had been admitted 3 weeks prior. The drive to the facility felt longer than my entire 18 years of life. Detective Reed drove me himself. When we walked into this sterile, white-walled reception area, the administration tried to block us, citing privacy laws. Reed didn't entertain them, flashing his badge and a freshly signed warrant. A nurse led me down a quiet hallway to a room at the very end. I stood in the doorway. Sitting in a chair by the window looking out at the gardens was a woman. Her hair was prematurely gray, her frame fragile, but as she turned her head to look at me, the breath caught in my throat. I was looking into a mirror. She had my eyes. "Clara," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. Her hands trembled as she stood up, looking at me as if I were an illusion that might shatter if she spoke too loudly. I found the house," I said, my voice breaking as the tears finally spilled over. "I found the journals. I know what you did for me." She crossed the room in 2 strides and collapsed into my arms. I caught her holding tightly onto the mother I thought I never had. For 18 years, I believed I was an unwanted burden left on the cold stone steps of St. Jude's. But standing there holding the woman who had sacrificed her entire life, her freedom, and her sanity just to keep me safe, I realized the absolute truth. I was deeply, fiercely loved. The legal battles are still ongoing. Silas Montgomery is facing decades in federal prison for kidnapping, extortion, and fraud. The Harris estate was liquidated, the dark, suffocating manor sold to a developer who promised to tear it down. With the money, I bought a small, sunlit house on the coast, far away from the shadows of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Evelyn is with me. She still paints, though now she paints the ocean instead of the mountains. We have 18 years of lost time to make up for, and every morning I wake up, I am grateful for the terrifying inheritance that finally brought me home.